Tecnológico de Monterrey.
Recibimos ahora a la doctora Sylvia Earle, quien nos honra con su presencia. Escucharemos una breve semblanza de la doctora Earle y disfrutaremos
Sylvia
de su
Earle.
conferencia
Sylvia Earle,
No Blue, No Green, No Water, No Life.
And the New York Times, living legend by the Library of Congress, and the first hero for the planet, is an oceanographer, explorer, author, and lecturer with experience as a field research scientist. She also is executive director for corporate and nonprofit organizations, including the Aspen Institute, the Conservation Fund, American Rivers, Mote Marine Laboratory, Duke University Marine Laboratory, Rogers Institute for Marine Science, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, and Ocean Conservancy. Former Chief Scientist of NOAA, Earle is founder of the Mission Blue Foundation and chair of the Advisory Council for the Harte Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies. She has a BS from Florida State University, an MS and PhD from Duke University, and 15 honorary degrees. She has authored more than 150 scientific, technical, and popular publications, lectured in more than 60 countries, and appeared in hundreds of television productions. Earle is the author of many books on the ocean, including Sea Change, A Message of the Oceans, and most recently, Ocean, an illustrated atlas with Linda K. Glover. Earle has led more than 60 expeditions and logged more than 6,000 hours underwater, including leading the first team of women aquanauts during the Tide project in 1970 and setting a record for solo diving to a depth of 1,000 meters. Her research concerns marine ecosystems, with special reference to exploration and the development and use of new technologies for access and effective operations in the deep sea and other remote environments. Honors include the Netherlands Order of the Golden Ark, inclusion in the National Women's Halls of Fame and the American Academy of Achievement, and medals from the Explorers Club, the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences, the Lindbergh Foundation, the National Wildlife Federation, Sigma, Vernon College, the New England Aquarium, the Seattle Aquarium, the Society of Women Geographers, and the National Parks Conservation Association.
It is a great honor for me to be here with you at Monterey Tech. Celebrating a 10-year anniversary. 10 years. Think of what has happened in that time. But in the next little piece of time, I want to consider the next 10 years, perhaps the most important piece of time in all of human history. Because as the previous speakers have so eloquently illustrated, we are at a critical point in history. Never before have we been able to see ourselves the way we can now, this small blue speck in the universe. There is nowhere else where 7 billion people can go. We have to make peace with the natural world. And this is the time, because going back 10 years, going back 50 years, go back 5,000 or 50,000, we could not know what you now can know, because we are the beneficiaries of all of that knowledge that has preceded us, and now have the ability to communicate in an unprecedented way. It's like a race. Can we learn enough, soon enough, to take action now that we understand, now that we know what we could not understand even 10 years ago, about the urgency of taking care of the air, of the water, of the natural fabric of life, the diversity of life. There was a time when I was a child that it seemed that the natural world was infinite in its capacity to yield whatever we wanted to take from it, or that we could use the ocean and parts of the land as well to put things that we didn't want near where we live. But now we know it all comes together. Could we have the next slide, please? That there is no away, of course. Part of why we now know is because the technology that can take us not only high in the sky, but now we can go deep within the blue heart of the planet, the ocean. I personally feel fortunate to have come along at a time when diving is possible. Charles Darwin couldn't dive. He did not have a face mask, did not have a snorkel, let alone the ability to put a tank on his back or get into a submarine and plunge into the depths. That is available to us now, to you. Next, please. My mother waited until she was 81 years old before putting on a mask and fins and taking herself under the ocean. So she told me later that she was really cross because I did not encourage her, she thought, to get into the ocean sooner. So I'm here to encourage you. You're not 81 yet, I think. She would say, don't wait until you are. Go now, go as soon as you can. Even 10-year-olds now can get the basic instruction, and anyone can at least put on a face mask and look into the sea. Next, please. I've had the fun, the pleasure, the joy of actually living underwater now 10 times. The first time in 1970, but most recently in July of this year. This is the most recent underwater laboratory available. It is in the Florida Keys. Next, please. Hundreds of scientists have been able to use this place called Aquarius. It's 20 meters down. It's offshore about 10 kilometers. It makes possible for people to stay a week or 10 days actually living underwater, day and night. It's like having a submarine, but it stays in one place. And for 20 years, this system has been an eye in the ocean, a window on the sea. Next, please. The great thing about it is you don't stay inside unless you really want to. There's a door in the floor that makes it possible to go in and out. Inside, dry. Outside, the ocean. Next, please. This past July, I had actually 5 companions, who were able to use the ocean as a laboratory. They called this piece of the ocean the electrified reef because instruments were placed outside, tied to corals, tied to individual sponges, getting to know this place, to monitor it over time. The value of being able to do this, just as with the system that you saw in the last presentation, about having a fixed buoy in the ocean that monitors temperature and salinity and other factors of what is going on in the ocean. Part of the global ocean observing system, the idea now that, like weather stations in the sea, but in this case, Aquarius adds to that, looking at life in the sea, and has become a part of the reef itself. Corals have grown around Aquarius and on Aquarius. Next, please. Fish have set up housekeeping. They regard that as home. And this time, unlike any other time that I've had a chance to live underwater, I had a chance to use a special helmet so that I could speak to the fish if they were listening. But I spoke to my fellow aquanauts, whether they were inside or outside, and I could talk to the world because not only inside the Aquarius were we connected to the internet, by using this special helmet that was also wired to the world, I actually had a television interview while I was out there looking at the fish. Next, please. But by diving and by living underwater, there are limits to how far we can go. It's possible, of course, with scuba to go 50 meters, a little bit more. Using special exotic mixes of gases, you can actually go to more than 500 meters and be able to explore and observe. Military applications, oil and gas industry, and other commercial applications make it possible for a handful of people to be able to do this special kind of diving. But it's not for everyone. Whereas getting into a little submarine is something that is so simple to do that even a scientist can do it. And I'm living proof that you can drive a submarine. A child can drive a submarine. I can drive a submarine. You can drive a submarine. We just need more of them. This little sub is one of dozens that now do exist. Next, please. And are now, for the first time, making it possible for people to observe at least to as much as 600 or 700 meters beneath the surface. Next, please. Of course, the average depth of the ocean is 4,000 meters, the average depth. The maximum is 11,000 meters. We're still just beginning to make our way into the sea, as we have during the 20th century made our way into the skies above, and together are for the first time able to look at ourselves with the kind of perspective that is absolutely vital if we are to make peace with nature, to make peace among ourselves. Next, please. There are many more submersibles, many more undersea robots, many more measuring devices to deploy in the ocean. This is like the early days of aviation, that the ideas that could be generated probably are being generated right here at Monterey Tech to solve the problems. How do we understand the ocean now that we have new means, new batteries, new kinds of electronics, and certainly driven by a new need? Next, please. So, not so long ago, this submersible, called the Deep Sea, came to Baja California and enabled scientists to look and see parts of that beautiful piece of Mexico that had not been observed before. Next, please. Of course, while the people were inside looking out, the fish were on the outside looking in. Next, please. I love these clear submersibles that make it possible to actually visit the ocean and explore. We are just at the beginning of the greatest era of exploration of the blue planet ever, because for the first time we have the means to take ourselves out and explore at first hand, complementing the other methods that give us insight remotely. Next, please. Next. So here we are. A few nations have the capacity to go as much as 6,000 meters. Russia has 4 submarines. This is one of them. It's one of the 2 Mir subs, Mir 1, Mir 2. Mir means peace in Russian, and one hopes that peace is what the Russians have in mind. when using these submersibles to explore the ocean. France has one. Japan has one. Soon, the United States will have one, as the Alvin, the workhorse of deep diving submersibles, gets reconfigured. And China has one that now goes to 7,000, not 6, but 7,000 meters. It's the deepest diving submersible in the world. It takes 3 people down to the very edge of those deepest places in the sea. Next, please. I had a chance to visit this facility in Wuxi, China, just 2 weeks ago. And next, please, peer out of the porthole, imagining what it must be like to go down 7,000 meters into the deep, dark heart of the ocean. Thank you. Next, please. James Cameron. He's a filmmaker. He's the director of Avatar, of Titanic, of The Abyss. But James Cameron is more than a filmmaker. He is also an explorer. He's a scientist at heart. And if you ask him, how did you get to be a scientist, an explorer, and a filmmaker? Well, he said, it's really easy. I say this too. You start out as a child, as a kid, and then you do what children start to do. They say, who, what, why, where, when, how. And he has never stopped doing that. I have never stopped doing that. Don't you ever stop doing that. Continue to ask questions. Who, what, why, where, when, how. That's the beauty of this institution. It's the beauty of this point in time. This, you who are technically savvy, you who have some engineering background know what it means to find the sweet spot when you're building something, when you're trying to make things fit together. You have problems and problems and problems, and suddenly things come together and it meshes. If you go too far, you lose it. But if you stay in that place, that's where we may be at this point in time, the sweet spot. Never before have we known what we now do know. We're in trouble. You've heard it this morning. We are in trouble. But the good news is we know we're in trouble. We did not know that when I was a child. We thought the planet would take care of itself. It's taken us decades, new technologies, new communication, new insight to understand we've got a problem. But that's where you start to solve a problem. And here we are. If we go further, we're going to lose that opportunity that we now have to protect biodiversity, to address climate change, to develop the alternatives to the kinds of energy that have gotten us into this severe state that we now face. The sweet spot. Count your blessings. You have come along at a time when we know. Never before could we know what we know. Never again will we have as good a chance as we now have to solve the problems, because we're armed. You are armed with knowledge that is unprecedented. And it's going to get better on that front every minute, every day. We find new things, new ways to figure things out. Next, please. That James Cameron image was of a system that he took to the deepest part of the ocean, 11 kilometers down, and he came back. Getting there, he says, is really easy. It's the coming back part from 7,000 meters that is cause for celebration. There are systems that can go anywhere in the sea, that any submarine can go, beyond where humans can go. Whole systems, suites of these creations that can gain access to the sea. Next, please. Here's one from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution that can go where James Cameron went where two people went in 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh, the first to ever see what it's like at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 11 kilometers down. This little vehicle, called Nereus, has been to the deepest part of the ocean 9 times and come back. But think of how much more we need to understand. Next, please. How much more there is to explore. Why do we have to go into the deep sea? Because it's alive. Wherever on Earth there is water, there's likely to be life, even beneath the bottom of the sea, in the cracks of the rocks. Microbes abound. We know quite a lot about coral reefs around the world. Beautiful places that have attracted human attention now for centuries. Places that abound with diversity. They are the rainforests of the sea in terms of great abundance and diversity of life. Next, please. But it's not just the corals. These systems, of course, have fish, and we have new means of looking at them, not just as something to swim on our plates with lemon slices and butter, but getting to know them, next please, swimming in the ocean, to see them face to face, to realize when we go to look at them, actually, they have a way of coming to look at us. Next, please. It's such a joy to go into the sea. If you go into the forest, the birds typically don't fly out of the sky and come and look at you. But underwater, the fish do. They come from wherever they are to come and check you out, to look at you. Next, please. And as I have discovered looking at them, there are no two fish exactly alike. They all have faces. They all have a place in the system, just as birds do, just on the land, just as any creature does, just as trees are all individuals. They all have a place. They all have a contribution that they make to whatever is what we call the living planet. Next, please. Every little creature, small, medium, large. Next, please. Or, really big. Next, please. What we have learned by taking ourselves into the sea is that these creatures have personality. We know that cats and dogs and horses and some people have personality. But it's true with life on Earth generally. We are just beginning to understand the importance of what an engineer might frame the great engine, the great blue engine that drives the way the world works. And that every fish, every microbe, every shrimp, every squid, all of those individual living pieces are like the components, the nuts, the bolts, the cogs, the wheels, the pieces that make the machinery function. All of them have a place. All of them have developed over this long process that precedes the arrival of humans on the scene. Next, please. We've taken advantage of what they have done to shape the way the world works. Now the world works in our favor. Going back through time, there are many parts of preceding history when the planet was not favorable to the likes of us. For the last 10,000 years, we have lived in what I suppose you could call geologically the sweet spot for humans. And it's only taken us a couple of centuries, 200 years, even mostly the last 50 years. We are moving away from that sweet spot into another phase that is not in our favor. We have the power of restraint. We have the power to take action now on our watch that will make all the difference in the world. One way or the other. Either we'll fail to do it and we'll continue down that pathway toward a less favorable planet, or we'll use our good brains, the knowledge that we have, and bring it together so that in our time, we will see a movement into a continuation of this sweet spot in geologic time. Next, please. Go back 300 million years, there were sharks. Go back 100 million years, plenty of sharks in the ocean. Go back 100,000 years, go back 100 years, go back 50 years. But the truth is that now, on our watch, since the time I was a child, 90% of the sharks are gone. This is something of geologic magnitude, and it's taking place because of us. Next, please. When I was a child, well, actually, when I first began to dive, I was told to watch out for the sharks. There are man-eaters out there. Well, now it's man eating sharks, not sharks eating man. That is the problem. We are consuming sharks at a rate that the ocean simply cannot sustain or replenish. There's a new market for them because of globalized markets. It's profitable to kill the sharks and send their fins to Asia, China mostly, but throughout the world now there's a growing luxury taste for shark fin soup. Next, please. There's a growing luxury taste for a lot of creatures. Next, please. That the ocean simply cannot sustain. Next, please. Tuna fish. Again, going back to the middle of the 20th century, not too many people ate tuna. But now, tuna have a price on their head. Every single tuna is now sought after by creatures, that would be us, who never went to the places that tuna live to extract them from the sea. Only now could we do these things. Only now, in all of human history, are we taking fishing to a scale that is clearly not sustainable. Next. Go to the Antarctic. I mean, who would go to Antarctica to catch something to eat until now? Now we're taking krill, small shrimp-like creatures from oceans that are so far away from where most people live. And yet we're taking them, not just the krill, but also the deep sea fish, the so-called Chilean sea bass, that may live to be a century old, or maybe only half a century, but much older than the animals that we grow to eat, like cows, chickens, pigs. We have to think differently about our consumption of wildlife, because not only are we taking those nuts, the bolts, the cogs, the wheels out of the ocean, we're destroying the food sources of the creatures who have no choices. We have lots of choices. We do not have to take wildlife from the sea on an industrial scale to feed ourselves. And if we think this is necessary, we have to think again, because 90% of the sharks, the tunas, the swordfish, the marlin, many of the creatures we love to eat are declining at a rate such that if we continue this way, by the middle of this century, there simply won't be enough to sustain the fishing that is now going on, or the ecosystems that may be far more important than the pounds of meat that we extract from the ocean. Next, please. This little fish, and it is a fairly small fish, this kind is called orange roughy. It's a deep sea fish. It gets to be about this big in 100 years. 100 years. About as old as some of the whales that we once took for meat, for oil, for bone. We changed our minds about the middle of the 20th century. Actually, not until 1986 was there a global moratorium on the commercial extraction of whales. We think about marine mammals differently. We could have exterminated every last whale, but we stopped because whales alive, we now know, have a value. There's so much to learn from them. The ocean is better because it has whales, has seals, has sea lions, has marine mammals. The same is true with fish. I can't imagine an ocean without sharks, an ocean without tunas, but we should imagine it because it's coming, unless we wake up now, next please, and think about other values. There are some nations that still take whales for meat. This is the Tokyo fish market. Iceland, Norway, and Japan are the three nations that continue to take marine mammals, especially whales, in a way that other nations have, by and large, given up. There would not be whales today if all of us, all nations, did what Norway, Iceland, and Japan continue to do. Next, please. So now we know. Now, with new eyes, we can look at the world. We can measure the changes. We can look at what was before and anticipate what will be going forward. We can make these amazing graphs that show the loss of ice in the Arctic, show how temperature is climbing, CO2 in the atmosphere is climbing, the release of methane into the atmosphere is climbing. Our numbers are climbing. When I was a child, there were only 2 billion people on Earth. That was double the number that were around in 1800. When Monterey Tech was formed, there were 3 billion, and as you know today, 7 billion people, each of us, doing good things, bad things, whatever. We're living on a planet that doesn't get any larger. Coming to grips with that, looking at the trends that we can now measure that our predecessors could not. We didn't know enough to be able to provide images such as this, the knowledge that we now have. Next, please. But it's a fact. Polar ice is disappearing. Next. We're witnesses. Bad news for polar bears. Next, please. Bad news for all of life that is dependent on ice in the high Arctic or in the Antarctic. Next, please. But it's bad news for us, too. Sea level rise is part of it. Global warming, of course, is part of it. But so is acidification of the oceans, trends that we could not measure, could not know before right about now, this important time in history. We have the power to take action. Next, please. But you first of all have to know. It's bad news for coral reefs. About half of them are either gone or they're in a state of sharp decline since the middle of the 20th century. Next, please. Coral reefs. Who could believe that we could be witnesses to the loss, maybe forever the loss of coral reefs, owing to our actions? Well, go back in time. Coral reefs have come, coral reefs have gone. The planet has warmed, the planet has cooled. There have been times when there's much more CO2 in the atmosphere than today. But we did not cause those things. Today, we are causing those things. It's not a slow process. It's a fast process owing to what we are doing. Next, please. Hurry up. Go witness coral reefs if you haven't. Take my mother's advice. Go dive into the sea. Understand why it matters that each of us must use our respective power, whatever it is. Some of my friends write music. They sing about it. They communicate in poetry. They communicate with song. Some of my friends are great with numbers. They use their clever minds to make the calculations, to draw the graphs, to measure, and then to communicate what this means. Whatever your talents are, this is the time, next please, to put it together. Never before has the Earth looked like this from space. Never before has the Earth been illuminated. We are the agents of these changes. Now, I love having lights. I love having the gifts that fossil fuels have delivered to us. We could not enjoy the level of prosperity that we all now do, but for burning coal, oil, and gas. Try to imagine going to the moon on whale oil as a source of power. Couldn't do it. Only with the power that we have captured in the past half century have we been able to achieve what we now enjoy. But the greatest gift of all of the burning of fossil fuels has been now we know. Now we know we have to look for alternatives, and we have to do this as quickly as possible. I don't blame the fossil fuels or the industries that have brought us these great gifts, but I will blame us if we don't take the knowledge, that special gift, that most important gift that the burning of these special forms of energy have given us. Next, please. This is the time to think about how do we sustain our level of prosperity. Now, there are problems, of course, and we haven't solved them all. This was the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, when our attempts to gather oil and gas from the depths of the Gulf of Mexico, this horrific explosion took place that took 11 human lives and took hundreds of millions of the lives of the creatures that live in the Gulf, from the microbes to the whales. Next, please. We still have much to learn about accessing the deep sea, about learning the true cost of what seems like cheap energy. The loss of the floating golden rainforests of life in the Gulf of Mexico because of the spilled oil and because of the burning that took place. Sargassum is a home that floats for hundreds of creatures that make this their only home. And, oh, by the way, like trees on the land, like the microbial forms of life in the water column, they generate oxygen, take up carbon. Like all creatures, all living creatures, we are a part of the system that makes this living planet what it is. Next, please. But it isn't just what we put into the ocean or what we take out of the ocean in terms of oil and gas or fish or shrimp or whatever. It's also what we're putting into the sea that's causing us problems that we could not know about, did not think about in the middle of the 20th century. Next, please. But now we know it's a big problem, not just for the animals, next please, that get tangled, but it's changing the nature of the ocean. Well, this image is a good news image. That turtle survived. It was snared by a little fishing float and some fishing line and was freed when it was found, and I hope is still swimming out there in the Gulf of Mexico. Next, please. But reasons for hope. Reasons for hope. This country represents some of the best reasons for hope that there are. The plan that you heard articulated about assessing Mexico's assets, the natural assets, and making a plan for what to do about it. Looking from the Gulf of Mexico all along the Pacific seaboard. I'll focus right here on a place that I consider a hope spot, and that would be the Gulf of California. Next, please. Where the richness of life is staggering, not just from the surface, not just in diver depth, but all the way down to the deep sea, filled with life, filled with the diversity of life that represents a long, long, deep history. Next, please. And places along the coast, like this treasured place, Cabo Pulmo, that is used around the world, celebrated as an example of how you can look at a place, if you protect it, the life that has diminished through extraction of wildlife, through fishing, through other pressures, if you protect it, really protect it and secure a place where even the fish and the lobsters are safe, amazingly, there is recovery. Cabo Pulmo is a hope story, reason is, as I say, held up to the world as an example of what we can do. It isn't too late to bring restoration to the Gulf of Mexico, to the Gulf of California, to the world that has seen in my lifetime, since the middle of the 20th century, a decline of the state of the ocean, declining health. But now we know what to do, having networks of protected areas. And Mexico is taking a lead on both coasts to identify critical areas. Cabo Polmo really shines as a beacon of hope. Next, please. I was diving there last year, next please, enjoying the avalanche of fish that comes and swims around to look at this strange creature, this primate in their midst. Next please. And over the years, to explore the Gulf of Mexico, for me, has been a joy and cause for hope. Also, from time to time, as in 2010, cause for despair. But as a child, on the west coast, the Gulf Coast of Florida, I would look out over the Gulf of Mexico and wonder if I ever would be able to cross that ocean and come out on the other side to Mexico, and here I am. This is not the first time, and it's not going to be the last time either. This country, working with your neighbors to the north, your neighbors to the south, to inspire them, to protect those most important assets, the air, the water, the wildlife. We have been drawing down those assets throughout our whole history as humans, thinking that no problem, nature is infinitely resilient, we thought. But now we know, and now you know. This is that magic time in history. We know it's not too late. Next, please. I love working with the Harte Research Institute, founded by my friends at the Texas A&M in Corpus Christi, working with a Harte family. Will Harte is here today. I knew his father, Ed Harte, and the ethic of the family of giving back has meant such a difference. And now their love of Mexico, so clear. When the Harte Research Institute was formed, 2001 really got up and running, the idea that tri-national collaboration, Cuba, United States, Mexico, working together to pool our intellect, to pool our sense of caring, to do something, to take care of the Gulf of Mexico. Great reason for hope. Great reason to think that it isn't too late to turn things around. Next, please. Next. This is the last slide, but I'm not going to conclude with it. I want to just tell a little story about this bird and then take you on a quick trip under the sea that reflects where I was on an expedition to, first of all, your Gulf of Mexico, also mine in a way. But first, that picture. Let's go back to it. I want you to just look at that bird, because she is not quite as old as Monterey Tech. Almost. She was hatched. Can we go back to that last slide, please? She was hatched 61 years ago. We know because she has a band on her leg that marked her back in the 1950s. And she has been coming back to that exact nest ever since. This is a Laysan albatross. Albatrosses live maybe as long as human beings do, maybe as long as whales, probably not as long as orange roughy or some other deep sea fish that it is thought to be as much as 2 centuries. Well, think of it. Think of the world that bird has seen, the distance she has flown over thousands of miles as she looks for squid and small fish to feed herself and to bring back to her nestling. She and her mate It takes about 10 years before albatrosses decide on who they will spend the rest of their lives with. But during that lifetime, they travel every year out over the ocean, and then somehow, without GPS, without whatever it is that we now use to find our way back to places from which we start, she goes back to that same place, and I saw her in January of this year. And she made me think about how much has changed and how she probably may have acknowledged the change. There's plastic in the ocean. It didn't exist when she was an egg. It did not. Plastics in the sea are new. Oil spills in the ocean, they are new. Great fishing fleets in the ocean, they are new. People have always fished, as long as there have been people, but not at the scale, the industrial scale that we are now imposing on our life support system, the ocean. Even if she understood why the world has changed, she would not know what to do about it. We're the only ones. Elephants are smart too, they live a long time. As I say, whales are smart, they too live a long time, but that bird's name, well, she's been given this name by people who admire her. She's called Wisdom. I hope we can find some wisdom in our lives, because this is the moment when we must take what we now know and use this sweet spot in time. But first, let's go diving. Could we have that little video clip, please? And you can just, without sound, I'd like to just continue the images alone. This was during a time in August of Veracruz, Mexico, where it was that magical night that happens once a year when the corals spawn. Actually, if you want to use the video, it's all right, use the sound. It's okay. Evening of August 29th, 2002, scientists from the Sustainable Seas Expeditions observed a mass coral spawning event off the coast of Veracruz, Mexico. It was like diving into a galaxy of life, a tropical blizzard, a snowstorm of new life. During 80 wondrous minutes, we documented both male and female corals, sending their spawn into the water column. The event took place 7 days after the August full moon, at a depth between 5 and 20 meters. And some of us kept bumping into spiny urchins, but the pain was worth it. It was the first time people had documented the mass spawning of coral in the western Gulf of Mexico. But of course, it's been going on for thousands of years. Seeing the spawning was a sign of hope, a chance that new reefs may be formed in places where corals have been destroyed. So that's it. You know, there is plenty of reason for hope if we use our power to protect the ocean, identify those critical areas on the land and in the sea, recognize that this is a time that we must seek alternatives to the fossil fuels that have given us such benefits. This is the moment, as never before, and maybe as never again. You are my greatest reason for hope. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. Tenemos tiempo para un par de preguntas y me voy a permitir leer la primera. The first question says, despite the use of marine resources, what is the ocean telling you about the changes that humans need to address in short and long term?
Well, I hope I've given you some clues about what we need to do. We have to make peace with nature. We have to protect those systems like Cabo Pulmo that are working. We must look at the areas of forest that remain and embrace them as if our lives depend on them, because they do. These are not just valuable in economic terms. In fact, we have to rethink economic terms. We have to account for nature. The cost of losing those systems that keep us alive far exceeds the value that we attribute to, let's say, fish dead or forests turned into board feet of lumber. Now we know. Individuals, I used to eat wildlife from the sea, and I know when I'm giving up, but I choose not to now, because I think the fish swimming in the ocean are more important than swimming on my plate. And James Cameron has taken a similar view. Mighty James Cameron, he said, I've given it up. As Wild Aid says, when the buying stops, the killing can too. I mean, it's true with whales, it's true with grouper, it's true with lobsters, it's true with anything. Now, maybe once in a while you can give yourself a special treat, but by and large, the industrial scale extraction of wildlife can't work any more than the industrial scale taking of birds could work. So there are individual things that you can do, but mainly, just use your good minds. Look in the mirror, because no one can tell you better than you can tell you what you're good at, what your powers are, what you care about. But listen to that voice and then do something.
Thank you. What has been the biggest challenge you have faced in exploring the ocean?
Not enough submarines. Not enough time. Oh my. Only about 5% of the ocean has been seen, let alone explored. We know enough to know that the ocean is in trouble. We know enough to know that every time you go into the sea, you're likely to see something no one has ever observed or reported on before. We know that the ocean drives climate and weather. We know that the ocean is home for most of life on Earth. It's 97% of the biosphere. We know that the magnitude of our ignorance is vast, and that's a good place to start. The greatest frustration is we need more time. We need to get out there. We need more people to recognize that that exploration is far from over, and that everyone can do something, that it's not too late, but we have to hurry.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Agradecemos a la doctora Earle su participación y el licenciado Eugenio Clarión Reyes, presidente de la Cátedra en Conservación y Desarrollo Sostenible, Andrés Marcelo Sada, le hará entrega de un reconocimiento. En el marco del 10º aniversario de la Cátedra Andrés Marcelo Sada en Conservación y Desarrollo Sostenible, seremos testigos de la firma de un importante convenio básico de colaboración entre el Tecnológico de Monterrey y dos importantes universidades del sureste de los Estados Unidos, la Universidad de Texas A&M Corpus Christi y la Universidad Estatal de Texas. A través del Centro del Agua para América Latina y el Caribe por parte del Tecnológico de Monterrey, Meadows Center for Water and Environment de TSU y Harte Research Institute de Texas A&M. El objetivo de este convenio es establecer el marco general para la colaboración futura entre las tres partes en proyectos específicos, haciendo hincapié en el desarrollo de actividades científicas interdisciplinarias, la educación y la divulgación de temas relacionados con la conservación y la gestión sostenible del agua, servicios ecosistémicos y la gestión integral de los recursos hídricos, en especial interés por la conservación de la biodiversidad, los ecosistemas y la calidad del agua. Nos acompañan esta tarde como testigos de honor y firmantes de este convenio Salvador Alba, rector del Sistema Tecnológico de Monterrey. Eugenio Clarion, presidente de la Cátedra Andrés Marcelo Sada. Doctora Sylvia Earle, presidenta del Consejo del Instituto de Investigación Harte, y Will Harte de la Fundación Will Harte. Ahora procederemos a la firma del convenio. Por favor, pasa.
Doctor, yo también hay que mencionar a Raúl Rodríguez. También está ahí.
Raúl Rodríguez, ¿cuál es su nombre? ¿En qué zona tienen que intercambien?
Raúl Rodríguez es representante de la Texas A&M.
También pedimos la presencia de Raúl Rodríguez, representante de Texas A&M, por favor. No sé si es... Sí. Brindemos un aplauso por la firma de este convenio. Agradecemos a todos quienes de manera presencial y a aquellos que a través de TEC Virtual nos acompañaron en esta tarde y les invitamos a participar el día de hoy en punto de las 5 de la tarde en la mesa redonda Interconexiones entre océanos, atmósfera y ecosistemas terrestres, en la que nuestros conferencistas magistrales compartirán reflexiones y responderán preguntas del público, acompañados por Ezequiel Escurra, director de la University of California Institute for Mexico and the United States, Jorge Soberón, profesor investigador de Kansas University y presidente saliente de la Cátedra Andrés Marcelo Sada, Ernesto Enkerlin, presidente de la Comisión Mundial de Áreas Naturales Protegidas, y Adriana Nelly Correa, miembro de la Comisión de Cooperación Ambiental de América del Norte y directora de la Cátedra en Sostenibilidad Andrés Marcelo Sada. Los esperamos en punto de las 17 horas, hora del Centro de México, a través del canal 2 TEC Virtual. Muchas gracias.